I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. A couple of years ago, we reviewed an album from a brand new artist from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. We were really pumped up. It's electronica, but it used guitars. It was a female vocalist who just had so much passion, so much power in her vocals. The album was called Native Speaker. It electrified us. It was one of my favorites of the year.
One of mine as well.
And I think, yeah, it topped out our list in 2011. Velocities in Music, we loved it.
Yeah.
Just an album that we love.
We got to see them live that fall, too. Great show.
We saw Braids live in 2011. Great. It was a great show. They actually played a lot of material that wasn't on their album.
Yeah.
Which, come to find out, is on their new album, which just came out, called Flourish, Flourish / Perish, which they're all into stylizing their name and album titles, which is cool. But this is a very different album. A couple things that we should note about this, artist is they have shifted in sound a little bit between their two albums. The description I just gave, between these two albums, an album we reviewed not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, was Blue Hawaii's Untogether, which is lead singer Raphaelle Standell-Preston, her side project. It's a bit more electronica, a bit more moody, and it's much more focused on cool moods. You definitely see a huge influence on Flourish Perish here. Tom, what was your take on this album?
Yeah, it kind of segueing from that, I mean, it's all about the construction of those electronic beats and the kind of bass melodies driving them. You don't really get a lot of like the mid-range melody support from something like a guitar or a more high-bassed keyboard. You get that more in the ambience of everything is where that's filled up. But it's really, to me, this album, many of the tracks you can focus on the kind of craziness of the beat, which they do a really cool job of blending those kind of what sound like programmed electronic beats.
Glitchy beats.
Good point. Well put. With the real kind of rock setup of drums. I mean, they're not played like a frickin' rock band that
No, it's not like a full kit set.
No, but it's a tightly wound kind of just intricate drum work.
Sure.
Now that combined with the kind of keyboard style bass that just kind of thumps through the songs, and then the very shrill vocals. Now, she's not actually quite as shrill as she was on Native Speaker. She's singing a lot more subtly, a lot more of the vocal styles that you actually got on Untogether.
Right.
However, what it does on this album that I think separates it a little more from Untogether and makes it more of a Braids album is that there's this subtle tension underlying everything. In the composition, in the performance, it's moody in a way that isn't like relaxing and chill necessarily. It kind of puts you on edge, but it does so without using a lot of like intensity, really.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that how they construct the songs is actually very different than Native Speaker. They really did change their sound fairly significantly. Although if you were to do a sonic comparison, A versus B, you can still tell it's Braids, right?
Yeah.
It's still very much a Braids album, and they still have that distinct sound that they established on Native Speaker. One thing that we should note is that they've stripped almost all the guitar out of this album, where Native Speaker was just overflowing with guitar parts that were made like electronica synths or melodies. They stripped all that out. Other than the last track, In Kind, track 10, there is absolutely no guitar on this album. And then In Kind actually plays very much like a track on Native Speaker. We'll get to that in a second, but another thing I want to point out is the composition of all these tracks really focused on layers and how they layered these electronic melodies together. Similarly, Raphaelle, she really made her vocals to be more like an instrument in this album, whereas in Native Speaker, the songs kind of weighed on, they completely relied on her vocal
They really did, because she was the driving force behind the dynamics, behind the direction the song was going, whether she was just going to freak out at any moment. Here it sounds more like she's along for the ride, supporting what else is there.
Yeah, so the end result of that, first of all, this is a bit bigger of an album. I think that this is even a little bit longer than Native Speaker. Native Speaker featured longer tracks that kind of that explored new territory. They kind of just went all over the place.
But there are only like 8 tracks.
Yeah,
Native
right.
Speaker,
And then there's some longer tracks in this one, but there's also some shorter tracks too. And I feel like that even the longer tracks don't accomplish quite as much. They usually just establish this idea and then just work this idea into a musical statement.
And kind of getting more to the simple approach to the album, I just felt like there were a few tracks in the middle that didn't quite hold their weight. Specifically being track 4, Hasek, track 5, Girl, and track 6, Together. Together being an 8.5 almost minute track.
Right, it definitely sags, and you can tell because none of our track picks are in that section.
Yeah, and after that I think it starts to pick up, and those first few tracks I think are really solid, but that middle section just sagged a little bit for me.
I really like the maturation that Braids showed on this album. I think that one thing that I definitely was disappointed in, and overall like this less than Native Speaker, but I love Native Speaker, so liking this less doesn't mean I don't like it. I still like it.
Yeah.
What I notice is that Raphaelle's vocals are just not driving that emotional intensity home. And because she's not belting it out anymore, she's not just doing these, she had this such shrill screams almost on Native Speaker that just electrified those songs. I think back to the track Lamakin, or however you say it. I went back and listened to that track today, and man, it's just so powerful. It drives this emotional stake like straight into you. You never get that on this record. You maybe a little bit in the closing track, In Kind, but still, she's more just like doing her shrill shriek thing there. It's not as emotional as you need. So there's never these high points of emotional intensity, and that makes some of these tracks less memorable. Even the longer tracks, the nicely constructed, well-written tracks, they don't have this emotional high point, so it's kind of hard to establish warmth without that.
And I respect the fact that that represents that they're going in a different direction. They're trying new things, and they're not relying on the same tricks that made Native Speaker so good. But that's also, there's a flip side to that, which is the mindset of just when you have an asset to your group's sound, why not use it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why not utilize it to contribute to the overall experience when you have that in your arsenal? So I think that was a little bit of a wasted opportunity, or a missed opportunity rather, but this still, I like the general direction they're going in. I wouldn't call this a sophomore slump. I don't think it was quite as strong as Native Speaker, but I still think that there's a lot of promise in this band, and it's an album that's worth checking out.
Yeah, you got to respect the fact that they were willing to take risks and push their sound to the next level, and at least take a step in maturing their sound in a direction. Now, one thing we should note, even though the keyboardist Katie Lee was featured a lot on this album, they're really, she left the band some point last year, so in the middle of recording Flourish Parish, she left. So now the band is continuing as a three-piece, so it's going to be really interesting to see where they go from here. I'm interested to see how, the three-piece, reunites and creates a new identity amongst themselves, and then goes out and creates their own sound. So you can expect a sonic shift between album 2 and album 3. We just now have to wait, a year or two for the next album. Tom, what did you think of Flourish Parish?
I am going to give it a 79.
Cheated. You stole my score. You stole my score.
Whatever.
79.
I said it first.
79. That's where this album's at. This is on that cusp of being something that's truly special, a must-listen album, but it's just not quite there. And I think that if we would have had a little bit more of Raphaelle's vocals providing some of that emotional kick in the ass, I think that this album would have succeeded a lot more than what it does. Still, it's a pretty solid album. We definitely would recommend this one to you guys. So go out, listen to it, and leave us a comment about Flourish Parish at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums coming out this second half of 2013 you'd like to see Tom and I review. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.